Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to talk about all of the books that I read in May, along with my May reading statistics. In May, I had one of the best months I've had all year. I did read the most books this month that I have ever read in 2022. I read almost the highest average rating. The last few books actually knocked it down. It was a lot higher before those last few books got in there. And then also the most DNFs I've had this year. First things first, let's go through my reading stats together. I read a total of 1,789 pages, not including any of my DNFs, which averages out to approximately 58 pages a day. I know there were many days I did not read this month though. That's kind of unusual for me, which means that the days that I was reading a lot. I also read approximately 70 hours of audiobooks this month, which averages out to about 2.3 hours per day, which is actually just about my sweet spot I've found. As for how I rated my books, I had 1 star, 3 2 stars, 8 3 stars, 3 4 stars, and 3 5 stars. So I read 18 books this month. I took 2 books off of my paused shelf and I moved them to my DNF shelf. So actively, I only DNF'd 5 books this month, but I moved 2 that I had previously put on pause and decided I don't think I'm ever going to be getting to these. They're just something that I'm not really that interested in. So I moved them there, which is why my pause shelf has a -2 because I didn't put anything onto my paused shelf, and my DNF has a +7. My average rating for this month was a 3.4. Before the last, I think it was like 2 or 3 books that I read this month, it was like a 3.7 and I was so happy. And then the last few books were like not good. I read a lot of genres this month. Once again, I don't know totally what's going on with me because in the past it was always fantasy across the board, and this year it's been a little bit weird. I'm not even going to go into everything on this chart to be completely honest, but you can look at it here. You can still see that fantasy is my highest, and that I did add graphic novel this month. I have read graphic novels in the past and I've always just categorized them as that, but I have not read any this year yet, so it's a new category for me this year. And to be fair though, the graphic novels were all sci-fi, so technically sci-fi, if I counted them towards that, would be a lot higher. Let's move on to this chart. This one is my pride and joy for this month. So I only hauled 3 books. I did plan on hauling those 3 books before this month started. I didn't necessarily know what 3 they were going to be, but I had put money aside from a previous like side gig job that I had worked because I was going on like a friend date with someone to a bookstore. So I knew I was gonna be buying books. But other than that, I didn't buy any books this month, which I'm super proud of because I'm trying to not buy a ton of books at all. Now, the thing that I'm really proud of though is that I did manage to get my own shelf below 40. So that was something I was working on, and to be fair, I had to cheat slightly to get it there. So I came into the month with it being at 46 and I am leaving with it at 37. Now, why I am cheating slightly is because there were like 6 or so books that I decided to take off of my own shelf, just unhaul them, but I didn't actually remove them from my bookshelves because they were books later on in series that I no longer had interest in finishing the series, or if I do plan on finishing the series, I will be picking up my library's audiobook copy. So I still own the physical books, but I have not read them and I don't have plans on reading them right now. So it's a little wishy-washy. Some I did unhaul, some I kept. It's weird, but they're no longer in my like owned, I plan on reading these books shelf, so I took them off of that shelf on my chart as well. So I came into the month with 12 arcs. I'm leaving with 12 arcs. I did read 1 arc this month and I gained another one. I didn't work very hard on my arcs this month at all, to be honest, but I do have plans to read a bunch in June, so that's really nice to know. Pre-orders, I had 6 coming into the month. I had 4 leaving. 3 of them came to me, and then I pre-ordered 1 more book this month. So I don't count that towards my hauls, to be completely honest, because I didn't purchase it. I guess I should be counting that towards my haul. So maybe I should say that I hauled 4 books. And then paused, I went from 6 to 4 because I decided to DNF 2 of them. And then my currently reading, I came into the month with 1, and I'm leaving the month currently reading 3 books. So my age demographic, I read a lot of adult this month with 13 in that category, and then only 1 new adult and then 4 young adults. Did I say that right? I did, hopefully. And then of course, it seems to be pretty normal in 2022 for me not to read any middle grades. So once again, that's what we are looking at. I read mostly from my own shelf with 11 books from my own shelf, 6 books from the library, and 1 book that was an ARC. So that feels pretty good. I'm clearing off my own shelf. And then how I read the books, 11 of them were audiobooks, 6 of them were physical, and 1 was an ebook. Now, I don't normally include this chart. I am just for this month because I kind of wanted to show you guys like what a weird month this was for me. So this isn't every single day that I read. This is just days that I finished books. So you can see on this chart between the 1st and the 10th of the month, I finished 2 books. And then from the 11th to the 30th, because technically today is the 30th, I haven't gotten to the 31st yet, I finished 16 books. So it was just kind of a weird time for me. And when I noticed that pattern that like I barely read in the first almost 2 weeks of the month, I was like, look how weird this is. Like I honestly, by the 10th, I was convinced that I was only going to finish 6 books this month. And then I finished 18. So weird things happened. It's okay. Sometimes it be that way. So those are all of my reading stats. Let's get into the books I read this month. And I able to kind of categorize a lot of these, so I don't think we're going to be here as long as talking about 18 individual books seems like it's going to take. At the beginning of the month, I did do a reread of Forest of Souls by Lori M. Lee. This is a YA fantasy that I read a while ago that I really, really loved, and I actually rated it 5 stars the first time, and I've been wanting to move on to the sequel. Did this month, but then I DNF'd the sequel, and I wanted to reread the first book in order to go into the sequel. I DNF'd the sequel because it's mostly something I wasn't vibing with at the time, so possibly I'll go back to it one day. I don't totally know. Forest of Souls wasn't as good the second time as I remember it being, but I still rated it a 4.5, so it still withheld a lot of like that goodness that I remembered from the first time. So this is the story of 2 young women. One is named Saoirse and one is named, I always forget the other one's name. The other one. And Saoirse and this other girl are working in like the Queen's Guard, and then one day on a mission, her friend dies, and Saoirse accidentally like brings her back to life, awakening her shaman gift. Shaman are not allowed in the country that they live in, but they are allowed in other countries in this land. And so they are called into this Forest of Souls, where in the very center there is this king named Ronan, and he is going to protect them from their queen, who is not happy with the fact that Saoirse has woken up her magical abilities. When they're there, they find out pretty quickly that Ronan called them there to help with an issue that he is having. He is the Spider King, and so there are lots of spiders, lots of creepy elements, and there is little to no romance in this book. I say little because I think that our main character is asexual. It's never said on page, but I just have a sneaking suspicion. So there's really not any that we see with our main character, but you might like recognize some elements with like other characters in the book. Now, I really enjoyed this one once again. I like how dark it is, especially for a YA book. I feel like it was totally YA, was in that category, but still like dealt with some darker elements and some darker themes. I really like Saoirse. She is a unlikable person, and so I find myself drawn to her and seeing like just how grumpy and moody she is through most of the story. And I really like her bond with her best friend, whose name I can't remember. There is like a whole entire explanation as to why her best friend has to go with her into this forest and why they're stuck together, but I'm not going to explain it because it's not brought up until later in the story, and I don't want to spoil anything for you all. If you're into YA fantasy, I do highly recommend this series. I think it's a good one, and I hope one day I can actually finish the second one and continue on. I don't know if there will be more in the series, to be fair. Up next, I read the Atlas 6, the first indie published edition, and then the Atlas 6, the Tor published edition. I read them back to back, both physically, and I highlighted in this one anytime that I really enjoyed a line or thought it was beautiful, and then I tabbed in this edition anytime I found any major differences. Now, I did do an entire video going very in depth into all of the differences between these 2 books, but I rated both of them a 5 star. I I actually on my Kaw pile got the same exact rating, but they were broken down slightly differently. So in this one, I liked the characters a little bit more, and then in this one, I liked the world building a little bit more. And in that video, if you haven't read the Atlas 6 and you want to know which one you should read to go into the Atlas Paradox, I have an explanation for which one I think you should read. And then also, if you've only read this one and you don't want to read this edition, I have all the spoilers that you will need so that you don't have to read this edition. Or I tell you like which parts of this edition you can read if you only want to read some of it. In my personal opinion, I liked this one a little bit better, although I do think that this one is structured better, and I think that this is a better story. And then I was kind of going through a slump and I wasn't like feeling anything, so I asked my friend to recommend me a thriller to read because I thought a thriller would really get me back into the mood of reading, because they just like tend to grab your attention. And so she found out that I hadn't read any Gillian Flynn books yet, and so she told me to try reading one of those. And when she said one of those, what I heard is try reading all of Gillian Flynn. So I read Sharp Objects, Dark Places, and Gone Girl this month, which I didn't love any of them. I was just like in a mood and didn't feel like reading anything, so I might as well just keep reading stuff that's like there in front of me. So Sharp Objects was my favorite. I think the more I sit on Gone Girl, the more I enjoy it, but I ended up rating Sharp Objects a 3.5, Dark Places a 3, and Gone Girl a 3.5, but in my Kaw pile, Sharp Objects got a few more points because I do think that it was just a better constructed story. Although I did start to notice some themes throughout Gillian Flynn's books, at least these three, that I didn't totally love, which goes into her kind of blaming people with mental illness as the villains of her story. So that wasn't like super fun. Sharp Objects is about a young woman who is a reporter who is sent back to her hometown to investigate some disappearances of young girls, and you find out a lot about her past. Dark Places is about this woman who you're kind of seeing her in two timelines. One when she was really little and her brother murdered their entire family and she barely made it out, and then her as an adult starting to realize that she is the key witness in seeing him murder the family, that she might have been wrong and that he might not have actually been the one to do it. And so she kind of uses the opportunity of this like fan club's money to investigate things. And then Gone Girl is about this other woman who goes missing, and you're following her diary from when she first meets her husband, and then her husband's POV from right when she goes missing, and the police investigating it, and them like slowly starting to think that he might be a suspect, and just kind of not really knowing what's going on. Her books rely heavily on unreliable narrators, which is something I really love, but also a lot of mental illness. So the unreliable narrator is unreliable because they're mentally ill and they can't necessarily like tell you what's good or bad. So I didn't necessarily love that, but her books weren't horrible and I really enjoyed large elements of them. They were not as dark as Karen Slaughter if you're kind of looking at like thrillers on like a darkness spectrum. Karen Slaughter is like the darkest thriller writer I have read so far, although I'm always looking for dark thrillers. And I'd say it's darker than maybe your like average thriller. I will say that why I preferred Sharp Objects slightly more to Gone Girl is I didn't totally see the twist coming with Sharp Objects, and so the very ending I was like, heck yeah, that was enjoyable. Even though I didn't love all of the story, I thought that ending was really, really great. Dark Places, I really enjoyed the beginning, but I felt like as the story continued on, I was just like, meh. And then Gone Girl, I really hated the book, like hated the book for the first 50%. And then from 50% on, I was pretty into it. So that's just kind of how I broke each of them down and how I finally got to all of their ratings. Gone Girl, if that beginning hadn't been so miserable for me, I would have rated it 4 stars and it would have been better than Sharp Objects. But because for 50% of the book, I was hating it. And the main reason why I was hating it is because we have very unlikable characters. But the problem is the characters felt like they were trying to tell me that they shouldn't be unlikable because they are talking about themselves and it is like about these characters. Like they're very cognizant of the fact that they are telling their own story, and it felt like they were trying to prove to me, the reader, that they were better than they actually were and that they couldn't be convicted of the things that they were doing. And then around the 50% mark, it changes and they no longer think of themselves as good. And so once I no longer had these irritating people telling me that they have nothing to worry about and they're such good characters, I could finally get into their story and like enjoy watching how horrible these people were. So after I did a little bit of a Gillian Flynn marathon, which that was before I was doing my weekly reading vlog. So unfortunately you don't get to see any of my like live thoughts for that video. I did next pick up The Discord of Gods, which is the 5th and final book in the Chorus of Dragons series by Jen Leons, the first book being The Rune of Kings. So I actually am a little bit disappointed in this book and a little bit disappointed in me. So why I'm disappointed in the book is because it just kind of fell flat. Jen Leons writes really, really good endings. I loved the ending of book 1 and 2, and book 3 and 4 weren't like horrible either. They just weren't like as amazing. So I felt like the finale to the entire series was going to be fantastic, and I just had no emotional connection to anything that was happening in this book or any of the characters. There was absolutely one scene that I really, really liked with my favorite character, Galen, and then other than that, I just kind of felt like it just fell flat. So it wasn't a horrible book. I rated it 3 stars, but it's something that like wouldn't stay with me. And honestly, even now as I'm talking about it, I'm like struggling to remember some of the main plot points that happened. I can remember the absolute ending, which I hated. It was awful. It was such a bad ending. I did not like it. But to be fair, it had a very convenient ending. And if you've been on this channel, you know that I hate convenient endings. So why am I a little bit disappointed in myself? So this is a series that I have been reading since the beginning of 2022 now. And as I've been reading, I have been tabbing. And you can see, of course, that as I went, I started tabbing less and less and less. So of course, with book 5, I didn't tab a single thing because I didn't have a single thought while reading this book. So I'm a little bit disappointed that I went from tabbing so much in the first book to having absolutely 0 thoughts by the last book. After that, I did read The Book of Night by... oh my god, she wrote The Cruel Prince. Holly Black. And I did not like it. I'll start saying here that it was not for me at all. I actually bought the book and I've already unhauled it. That's how much I disliked this book. It was just not an enjoyable book for me. So in this book, we are following Charlie, who lives in this... it's kind of a contemporary setting, but people have shadow magic, and so they can awaken their shadows and then use them to do different tasks and stuff. And she works at a bar by day and is kind of like a con woman by night kind of a thing. And she comes across this Book of Night, and she's tasked to go and find it and save it. And she's dating this boy named Charlie, and she lives with her sister Posey. That's it. That's the entire book. She's trying to find this book called The Book of Night, and I didn't like it. It was boring. That's really what it boiled down to, is I didn't relate to any of the characters. I didn't care about the plot. I felt like we focused way too much on just Charlie kind of existing, and I didn't like any of the things that Holly Black did with like the ending. It was very, very slow, which I can get behind a slow book sometimes, but it was just... the characters like did not hold up the rest of the book for me from the slow nature that the storytelling was being told in. I really hated this ending. It wasn't the worst thing ever. I definitely don't think it was as bad as The Discord of Gods' ending, but I did not like this book enough to keep it. Or if there is going to be a sequel, which I'm not really sure if it is or isn't, because there was kind of like an open ending. So I don't know if it's going to be an open ending or a cliffhanger or what. Online, there's not like any news about a sequel, so I'm guessing there's not. But if there would be more books in the series, I would not read them. Not a fan. So I ended up rating this one a 2 out of 5 star. And I was very close to DNFing, and the only reason why I didn't DNF is because I will say Holly Black's writing is beautiful, and she does have like a really good way with words. In fact, on my CAW pile, I rated like her writing really high and then everything else really low. She just has that kind of like flowery, prosy writing without getting like too drawn into the metaphors and the details. And so I enjoyed that element of it, and I was able to finish it without like hating myself completely. So after I read Book of Night, I read Electric Idol, which is the sequel to Neon Gods. So it's in this like dark, I think it's the Dark Olympus series, and it's about different Greek gods, but it's modern day and it's different love stories there. So book 1 was about Hades and Persephone, which I thought was okay. And then book 2 was about Psyche and Eros, which I actually really enjoyed this book. And the only reason why this book didn't get a higher rating is because the actual like plot line of the story sucked. It like sucked so much, but the like love and how they developed it, and the smut and how the story was told and how she retold the story and the characters were all phenomenal. And I think she did a really good job with it. And I really enjoyed this book. You don't necessarily need to read book 1 to understand book 2. There is something that happens at the end of book 1 that is talked about a lot in book 2, so you would be spoiled for that, but you would totally understand everything and they would have no issues. And honest to God, like, plot is not important to either of these books. So like, you could read them. I did leave book 1 with about 1.5 million questions as to the world building and how things worked. And I don't have any explanations for them in book 2. I don't know why. Like, in book 1, I was so much more focused on, like, I don't understand how the world works. Are these people actually gods? Are they not? Like, how does magic work in this world? What is going on? Is there an underworld? Like, where is this world even taking place in? Is it on Earth? Like, because they talk about Los Angeles, but they're also in Olympus. I had all of these questions, and in book 2, none of them were answered, but for some reason, I was less focused on that, and I was way more into the story that's being told. So if you're not familiar with Eros and Psyche, which I was not going into this, Eros's mother, Aphrodite, hires Eros or sends him off to kill Psyche, and in this story, what he ends up doing is when he reaches her, he doesn't want to kill her. He has fallen in love with her. So he does a quick arranged marriage with her. They get married that night so that he can protect her. And that brings the wrath of kind of both of their families down on them, a little bit more so his side. And then it's also about the two of them like having to work together to keep each other alive, but also like falling for each other. And Eros being like a very Viking-esque person. And then what I also really enjoyed is Psyche is very fat, very overweight, but she is also described as being one of the most beautiful people ever. And so I really, really liked how the author talked about those elements and talked about how some people viewed Psyche versus other people, and how Psyche viewed herself and how she had learned to love herself. This wasn't a journey of her learning to love her body and learning to accept herself. She had already accepted herself, but it did talk about how every once in a while things come up or people say things, and it does just kind of trigger you a little bit. And I just really liked it. I thought that it was an enjoyable book. What did I rate it? A 3-star. I normally don't recommend 3-star books to people, but I would say if you're really into new adult smutty fantasy romances, that this one was a pretty decent one. And I am very excited to read the next book. It comes out in a few weeks. It comes out in June, but I won't be reading it until July, I don't think. I can't remember what book 3 is called, but it's going to be about Helen, Achilles, and Patroclus. And then she already has a release date for book 4, which I also right now can't remember who it's about or anything about it. But I'm excited. I think it's wicked beauty. After that, I picked up The Troop, which was a reread for me. I absolutely love this book. It's one of my favorite horror books of all time. I have talked about it briefly on my channel before, so I won't go a ton in depth because I don't really have any new thoughts about it. But this is the first time I had the physical book in front of me while I was listening to the audiobook, and it was fantastic to partake in that way. I highly recommend the audio for this book and other Nick Cutter books, to be honest. And this I did decide to annotate, so I tried a new annotating method, which I will at some point be talking about on my channel, I think in the next 2 months. So The Troop is about this, basically a Boy Scout troop in Canada who is on this like isolated island, and when they're there, some unfortunate person brings a disease to that island. And so it is about these Boy Scouts not knowing who to trust, not knowing what's going on with the outside world, not being able to get off of the island, and not knowing who amongst them is sick. And with that, you also get snippets of news articles, of people's interviews, of their parents' interviews, of the doctor who created the illness and his research lab, of trials related to everything. It's really good. There's like other information besides just our Boy Scouts, and it really helps build the world and give you more information as to why things are going the way they're going. And I really enjoyed it. I really liked my reread, and it made me want to reread The Deep, which I think I will be doing very shortly, to be honest. So next up, I read We Are the Ashes, We Are the Fire. I keep wanting to say the flame, but it's We Are the Fire, which is the story of a younger girl named M. I believe she's in high school, and it's the story after the fact, but her older sister who is in college survives a horrible sexual assault / rape. And then there's the trial, and then our story takes place right after the trial happens. And it's mostly following our main character, who is the sister. And it's a lot about her dealing with the trial, dealing with justice, and how there is kind of a lack of justice. Even if a man is convicted and shown as guilty, the sentencing can be light many times. This was a very serious book. It is a YA book, and it was really helpful to see how things after an event take place in a family and how they go about happening. and I think that it had some really important things to say, but I think it missed the mark slightly, and I'll go into that after I finish talking about it a little bit more. So half of the book is about this, and then half of the book is actually the story that our main character is writing to deal with her grief. So she is writing this novelization of this woman knight that she found online. There's kind of this connection between the two of them needing a sword to help defend their families. And so half the story is that, which I will say I did not enjoy reading the novelization of this lady knight. I found it quite boring. I was way more into our main character dealing with her grief and dealing with all the people around her. She does make a new friend kind of near the beginning of the story who does use they, them pronouns, and the two of them start to form an unlikely friendship kind of because their parents are going through a major divorce, and then our friend is going through this with her whole entire family. So the two of them kind of bond over trauma together. Now, one of the things I think that this book missed the mark on, the main thing that I would have to complain about this book and say why I think it wasn't as effective as I wanted it to be, is I wanted it to focus more on the fact that yes, our main character is going through so much trauma and is dealing with so many things, but she genuinely made that trauma about her and how she dealt with it. And she oftentimes did not listen to her sister or her parents, who are also going through this horrendous thing and going through their daughter being in the news all the time and being bashed on Twitter and having all of this hate thrown towards her. And I think that she was just a little bit too self-centered and a little bit too focused on her own thing and her own grief to even realize that people around her are going through it too. Now, they did mention that slightly near the end. The mom kind of gave her a talking to, but I feel like it could have been more of a point to be like, just because you're going through grief doesn't mean that you can knock out other people's grief around you. And she does learn that slightly with her friend Jess, where she realizes that Jess is going through things too, and even though, you know, they've talked about their parents' divorce a million times and wanted things to happen, when they do happen, it's hard, and she wasn't a great friend at all times, which is brought up, but I just felt like it could have been more of a focus in the book. So I did really like the part of the book that was talking about our main character. Didn't necessarily like the prose, the novel, whatever you want to call that other part. But overall, I think it was a pretty decent read, and I think that it had a lot of important things to say to especially a young adult audience. And so I ended up rating it a 3 out of 5 star. Next up, I did read the 3 graphic novels for Skyward. So there's volume 1, 2, and 3. These are a complete story, the 3 of them together. And it is about this world where one day gravity just kind of switches off. And so people have adapted to that. Our main character, Willa, her father was one of the scientists who predicted the gravity would turn off, and she is living with him 20 years after the event, and he is afraid to go outside and thinks that he has found like a cure for gravity. She thinks that he's kind of losing it a little bit, so she tries to go and get some help from some of his old friends who happen to have become very wealthy off of gravity not existing anymore. So I actually really enjoyed this series a lot. I feel like the art was beautifully done and really good and really aided to the story. I ended up rating book 1 a 4.5, book 2 a 4.5, and book 3 a 4 star. Overall, I highly recommend this series. There are giant bugs, there is action, there is drama, there is a little bit of romance, and there were some things that it had to say about society, especially with like wealth and money and economic status. One of the things that I will say though is our main character, this is her. Let me find a like better face image so that you can see her better. I'm gonna try to find one without any spoilers on the page either. So this is our main character, Willa. So I just feel like while her skin was darker, a lot of her features were not that of African or Black descent, and it is said in the book that she is a Black woman. And I just personally think the artist could have done like a slightly better job. Not to say that, you know, every Black person looks the same. Of course not. I just feel like you could have recolored her slightly and no one would have noticed. There were a lot of people who worked on this series, and I loved the story, of course, but when I was looking through all of the people that worked on it, there were about 6 of them. Only one of them was a woman, and if I remember correctly, none of them were not Caucasian. I would have to double check that, to be honest. I mean, it's not necessary, of course. I like to be aware of that, specifically when I am reading graphic novels, because a graphic novel has so many different people working on it, and it's so much easier when you have 6 people working on a project to have at least one of them be diverse. I don't know what I'm exactly trying to say. It was good. I enjoyed the story. I would read them again. I'm glad I own them. I would recommend. Up next, I read Children of Time by Adrian Chachotski. So the sequel to this is one of the ones that I own, but I unhauled. I will not be keeping it, and I'm kind of on the fence about whether or not I'm going to be keeping this book, to be honest. Children of Time is about this space crew that is being sent off because basically Earth is dying, and they come across this planet that would be perfect for them to live on because it was terraformed many years ago. The problem is, when it was terraformed, it was meant to be terraformed for monkeys so that we could develop a new human race to breed with, but something went wrong. You learn about what it is, and there are giant spiders. And so I thought most of the story was going to be about giant spiders and humans fighting for this planet. Absolutely not. That was like one chapter near the end of the book of what this was about. Most of the story was about these spiders living millennia and growing into these sentient beings that they are by the end of the book, and then it switches between that and humans exploring space and trying to find another planet that maybe they could live on, and then realizing, no, that was probably the only one that we could survive on, let's go back to it. I am not a huge fan of that overarching storyline where it's not like one character, it's millennia of characters and thousands of people that we go through, and I had a hard time relating or connecting to any of the characters because I got to see them all for such a short amount of time. I also really wanted to see more spider humans fighting together, and I got barely any of that. Most of the story is just kind of slow paced. I feel like the author didn't add much into the conversation of what was being talked about here. There was this whole entire matriarchy in the spider colony, and I didn't think it was done well, because the matriarchy, and I talked about this in my reading vlog that I think came out on Monday, the matriarchy is basically a patriarchy, because the strongest are in charge, the biggest are in charge. The smaller males are not cared about, are oftentimes sexually assaulted, oftentimes murdered, and no one cares about them. The society is built around strongest, smartest, most religious, and that to me is just our patriarchy, but you swapped the two names. Whereas I feel like a matriarchy has different things that are important to them and different things that stand out to them, and is much more focused on other elements. And then also the women spiders didn't care about young, didn't care about raising their families. So it's a patriarchy. It's a patriarchy where you have women as the lead. Anyways, I've ranted about this already. I ended up rating this book a 2.5-ish out of 5 stars. Next up, I read Relic Room, which was my one arc for the month. It was on Wattpad previously, and it will be published sometime in June for people to be able to purchase like a physical copy of. I really loved the beginning of this book, and then it slowly descended into something that I cannot say that I loved. So we are following mostly one girl, and she is a necromancer in this world where reapers are basically in control, and necromancers can bring people back from the dead, have like a second ability. It's really cool. Magic is done very interestingly, and she goes on missions with her parents to fight off like bad, evil magic, things that have been done wrong, creatures that are loose and hurting people. And on the first mission that we see, she runs into this boy, and she accidentally walks away with his locket, and so he is trying to hunt her back down to get it back. But then also you find out about this giant evil that is coming after the two of them and is hunting them down, and they both have to be trained in their gifts. Once you got past like the two of them trying to find each other and then trying to figure each other out, and you got into them being trained and everything, I just didn't like the story anymore. There was a lot of weird pop culture references that were kind of used in the story that I think it could have been way better if you hadn't used them. And then I also didn't like how many different characters had POVs in this book. I mean, you get our two main characters, and then you also get almost all of the cousins of our main character, which there are quite a few of them, and then also a few of her aunts, and then the bad guy, and then the teachers training them, and then some other magical. It was just like way too many POVs. While the magic was really cool, the world wasn't explored enough, and I didn't understand like at all even what reapers did, to be honest. So I was kind of left confused, and I feel like if this book had had more time to develop its world and more time to explore its magic and more time to figure things out, that I would have been really, really into it. So I ended up rating it a 3-star. Next, I read House of Eclipses, which was my least favorite book I read this month. Oy vey. So this is the story of a young woman who she lives on a planet that is, the sun and the moon are no longer rotating around it. So where she lives is always day, and then the other side of the planet is always night. And so she worships this god named Sol, which is basically the sun. And then the other side worships the god of the moon, which is named Lumen. And her father is the king of Sol, and he has 3 daughters, and he sends 2 of them off to meet the prince or the king of Lumen, and the king wants to marry one of them, and so he sends off 2 of his daughters to try and like see like, oh, which one do you want to marry? And he tells both of them, whoever marries the prince king, you have to get the crown from him, so and give it to me so that I can live forever. And so they're like threatened basically and sent off away to try to get into an arranged marriage. Now this story, its characters were some of the worst characters I've ever read. Oh my God, they were so insufferable. Let's start right here. I rated this book a 1.5 out of 5 stars. I did not like it. And it boiled down to like the bad characters were purely evil and the good characters were purely good. And the way our main character talked about her sister was so disgusting. So our main character dressed very modestly and didn't flirt with anyone and didn't show any skin and never lied and never cheated and never did anything bad. And then her sister was a giant slut and slept with any boy and showed off way too much skin and flirted with everyone and was spoiled and couldn't say thank you and treated servants poorly and was rude and jealous. And it just wore on me. Like after a while I was like, stop just talking about how awful your sister is. Like, can she not have one good quality? Like, no. And it wasn't just like between the 2 sisters, it was any character who was deemed bad was like only just shat upon. And some of the things I feel like are with the sister were just girl hate. Like, I hate when books have girl hate for no explainable reason. Like, why do you have to sit and complain about how much skin your sister is showing? It's hot. You live in a desert. Why does it affect you? Why do you care so much? Like, just stop. Yeah, I rated 1.5. I already told you that. Let's move on. The final book that I read this month, I actually finished today, and I don't have positive things to say about it either. It was The Glass Hotel. I ended up rating this one a 2-star. It was just boring. I didn't like how many POVs we had. Another story where it's just way too many POVs. And it was super confusing to follow. And I feel like when you got to the end of it, that it didn't make sense to have the world as big as we had it. We are following a young woman named Vincent. We kind of follow her from when she's a child and she is getting in trouble at school to when she is a young adult working at a bar to make money. And then when she gets married to this very wealthy man as part of like a deal, kind of arranged marriage sort of a thing. And then when he gets caught for doing crimes and sent to prison, and then she's poor again, and then she goes on this boat, and then everyone thinks she's drowned. And I don't even want to talk about this book, to be honest. I didn't like it. It wasn't great. I wouldn't recommend. I will be having a video coming out about all my thoughts about it shortly, so I think I'm just gonna point you to that and just know for right now I didn't like it at all. That's it. Those are all the books I read this month. I hope I got through them pretty quickly. I am tired of talking, so I think it's time for me to go. I hope you had a really successful May. I appreciate each and every one of you. I don't remember how my outro goes, but until next time, I'll talk to you in the comments. Bye.